Hello, hello. Welcome to Healthy Perspectives, a podcast that takes on current cultural and social issues through a clinical lens. Hello. All right. Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us again. For those of you who are brand new, please, if you find this content to be helpful, like, subscribe, do all those things, get the word out there. But most importantly, please just share this with folks who you know would benefit from it. We come in here and we try to make a difference. That's it. We believe in healthy perspectives, and we believe that people need to know things. And if they don't know them, they need to get informed on them. And so I try to bring current, relevant, cultural, social, psychological issues to the forefront. And today is part 3 of a series that I'm putting together on residential programming. The first one, we talked about some of my early experiences in teen programs, then some of my later experiences in teen programs is part 2. Both of those were just setting a stage. They're setting the stage for today and the next one. This one, I think, is going to have a lot more meat. And then the next one is going to be another really intense opportunity to do some understanding and some growth and some learning. Understand also that this is coming from a good 10 plus, 14 years-ish in residential type programming. That's a lot of experience. And not all of it was great experiences for me. You can go back and listen to the first or the second. I had some pretty rough experiences, some areas where I was naive and didn't understand some things, where I could have been a better I could have done a better job of making an impact in the whole system, because I was I got kind of out of naivete. I was sort of channeled into, this is my group, this is my these are my people, and I'm just going to make sure I do the very best that I can. Now, in a perfect system, that would have been sufficient. But in the imperfect system that I came across, a couple of them, it was sufficient for the majority of the people that I worked with, but there was a whole bunch of stuff outside of my purview because of my narrow view that ended up costing a lot of kids a lot of pain and suffering, unfortunately. So today, my question is: residential programming for teens, helpful or harmful? That's the question of the day. Is residential programming for teens helpful or harmful? And unfortunately, I'm going to give you the short answer, but then I'm going to explain why. The short answer is it depends. You're going to hear, if you look around, there's a lot of stories of people who went to teen programs and they came out feeling damaged. Let's be really, really clear on this. People don't typically end up in these teen therapeutic boarding schools, these, because they are well-adjusted, got things going on in a good direction in their personal life, in their academic life. That's not the typical audience. So start from the premise that to some degree, there is either family or individual dysfunction occurring that is interrupting a system. In other words, you're not starting from a place where everything is ordinary, where you've got well-adjusted families, well-adjusted kids. It's not starting from that premise. And there's an infinite number of reasons why that could be what's going on. That being said, I personally, from my psychological understanding, sociological understanding, cultural understanding, do not believe that most people are broken, which means The system is responding, the individual, the client, or the system, or both, are responding to these stressors, these friction points. And they're doing it or causing some unhealthy coping mechanisms. For instance, trauma, we'll start with just trauma. In trauma is a natural process. It's a natural process to preserve life. Now, a lot of people don't realize this. They don't know this, but in trauma, if you're traumatized, your system, for instance, let's go with like a physical trauma, car accident. People often come out of car accidents and they don't remember the accident because the system by design eliminates that memory, at least in the short term, sometimes permanently, so that the trauma doesn't have to be relived and relived and relived and relived. That's a natural process. But in the worst case scenarios, it can create a loop where a person goes into these states of being where they are not remembering. They act in the way of the trauma. Right? We used to refer to that as PTSD, which is still PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And we used to often think about it as in terms of the military, where somebody'd start low crawling because they were having a trauma response to something in their environment, whether that's a dream or some sound or a smell or whatever. And it takes them back. It reactivates that trauma. Well, in the residential programming world, they come in, the students would come in, and their system is doing a natural response to something in their environment, and their environment and that response are not getting along. And so they're already starting off to some degree in a deficit, because what they thought would work didn't work. And now they're trying to figure out, or they think it works, but it didn't. That happens too. So the real answer is it depends. Sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it's harmful. Sometimes you can re-traumatize the trauma, and that's not good unless there's safety parameters around it. So it really does depend. It depends on many factors. I'll give you just a brief overlay. First, how they get there. It matters. The love and support of their family and friends. It matters. The love and support of the staff and the new people that they're going to interact with. It matters. The way they are transitioned from home to the program, the way they are transitioned from the program back to home. It matters. Every transition along the way matters. And wrapping them in love and care is huge. So most of the kids, the vast majority of the kids that I worked with, understood one thing about me. I was a flawed person. I still am. But they understood that I truly gave a crap. That was my primary objective. And I made it very clear when I would sit in individual time with them, when I would sit in group sessions with them, when I would, when I would have an hour and I'd give them an hour and 20 minutes, they knew I cared. And I made lots of mistakes along the way, but I did not ever regret one time giving a crap. I didn't regret it. I am so glad that I genuinely built relationships with all of those kids and families because I cared. And to be honest, that's probably the main reason that I had a good level of success. It wasn't because I was all that special. I just cared. I care deeply. People matter to me. So Let's go with, here's your tip. I know we're already probably 10 or 15 minutes in, something like that, but let's go with your tip of the day. I know we're getting there late, but the tip of the day today is pick a good teacher over a good class. Pick a good therapist over a good agency. Pick a good therapist over a good program. I was once told that if I had a choice to make between taking a good professor or good teacher, or I could pick the class that really intrigued me, pick the good professor or good teacher. Here's why. When you're with a good professor or good teacher, when you're with a good therapist rather than a good agency, when you're with a good therapist rather than a good program, you're going to get a much higher quality experience. In other words, I may have wanted to go learn this other topic, but the amount of learning I would do in there, if the professor wasn't good, would be marginal. It would be mostly self-taught. I can self-teach. So I should pick the good professor and get the healthy experience over the intriguing course. It's no different with therapists. None. Matter of fact, Matt, this is one of those things that I learned when I was in one of those failing programs. When it ended and I watched it all play out, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was caught totally off guard. And as was most of the people there, one of the things that I came away with was from then on, always told parents, told clients, pick a good therapist over anything else. That personal relationship that's good and healthy is the most meaningful aspect to any teen program. If you got a good therapist, you're going to have a hard but good experience. Hard because they're going to challenge you. Good because they're going to love you through it. All right. We're going to back up a little bit. Here we go. Types of programs. I don't know if you know this. Many of you who are listening probably do. But types of programs, I'm going to give you some therapeutic terms. There's behavioral modification. There's relational programs. Okay. Behavioral mod is the old CDU behavioral modification program. There are a lot of programs, less and less every year, but there are a lot of programs that still function off of the behavioral modification model. It's a terrible model for 99% of all the teens that would be needing therapy. It really is. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's probably 97%. There's about this 3% population that requires the behavioral modification model, which is highly structured, disciplined, and discipline, not meaning they're tortured or anything, but discipline. I've heard the stories about programs that did that crap. I'm not talking about that because I've never been part of that. But the behavioral mod will use structures that overemphasize the disciplinary structure so that it's fear-based. Fear-based does not work with most people long-term. Now, here's the tricky part. Fear-based for people who are smart, which the kids that I worked with and the families I worked with were smart. If you have fear-based aspects of the program, which I found out after the fact that there were some in at least one of the programs I participated in that I didn't know of at the time because I was not fear-based. The fear-based model, if you are a well-adjusted person, what you're going to do is you're going to identify the fears that are causing the problem. you're going to make an adjustment and you're going to get out as quickly as you can, which every teen in a program wants to get out as quickly as they can. Just about. It's not exactly right, but just about every. I mean, there was maybe I would come up with 1 or 2, maybe 3 anomalies a year, max. They want to go home. And how can you blame them? They're teenagers, sometimes hundreds or thousands of miles from their families. They belong with their family in the big picture. What I used to tell people is relational. If I had to give up one Christmas with one of my kids or my wife so that I could have 50 fantastic, well-adjusted, meaningful Christmases after that, it would be worth it. If I start getting to 2 or to 3, I start questioning that. But 1, I would do that if it meant more meaningful, healthier relationships that would last for the rest of our lives together. So behavioral mod, not a fan. I do not recommend the behavioral mod programs. Matter of fact, should behavioral mod be necessary? I think it's a lockdown facility type program. And those should be very rare. You should probably be working mostly with either incarcerated or very close to the incarceration process, meaning if they're, fully addicted to drugs, or they've been stealing, and I'm not talking about a little bit, but they got this long-term, 2-year pattern of major problems. You would also be talking about clients that had complete psychotic breaks, suicide attempts. And I'm not talking about suicidal ideation with a scream for help. That's different. A scream for help is different than an attempt. And a good therapist knows the difference most of the time. Okay. In those situations, behavioral modification in a lockdown facility might be necessary. Those are so incredibly rare. The relational model is the standard. It's the standard. We look at the 7 buckets of love. We say, romantic, that's a never, because I'm a therapist with anybody outside of my wife. And it's a no because they're outside of my wife. So it's a romance, no. Family, yes, they need that bucket filled. So family should be an integral part of all programming, always. Your friends, they should develop new friendships, but maintain contact with old friendships as early in the program as possible. Filial playfulness, every program should have playfulness. Every program should have mentorship. And I will get into some of this more in detail later. And every program should teach kids identity work, because that's the self-love. That's one of the 7. And then on top of one of those 7, you've got agape, the idea of there's something bigger than you in this world. Connect to it, be part of it. It's the idea, it's not a total conformity. Using your uniqueness, what do you bring to the table that helps the bigger good? And that should be explored. That should absolutely be explored. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Now, types of programs. Well, a lot of times what you're going to see is programs either academically focused, athletically focused. They get into the arts, they get into the sciences and the math. They have a draw. Understand, when you're doing any teen therapeutic program of any kind, those are all secondary, because those can be done at home. Now, could there be a new model created? Yeah, you could create a new model, a boarding school that has an initial therapeutic aspect to it, but we don't see those. Those don't, to my knowledge, exist anywhere. Would that be a more ideal situation? Yeah, it would, because then it's the therapeutic aspect gets to be the focus when that focus is necessary. Like when I find out, some kids, parent has a stage 4 cancer, I'd be able to reinsert them into the therapeutic component. That would be ideal, but we're not there. Like we don't have that, to my knowledge. So keep that in mind. The idea is to get them in and as efficiently as possible, get them home to do the academics, to do the athletics, to do the arts, to do the sciences, and to be with their core friendships. That being said, a lot of program friends end up being lifelong friends. So keep that in mind too. Friendships and programs are a very unique bond. Sometimes they trauma bond together. That's not the healthiest ones. Sometimes they help each other in their healing. They go home and they keep in touch periodically, or it fades. Most relationships, when, there might be one or two, but the rest should naturally fade off. That's part of growth and development and life. So interventions, quick overview here for you. Wilderness. There's two versions of wilderness. There's the base camp model and the nomadic model. Again, transition to wilderness is a big deal. Transition out of wilderness is a big deal. The base camp model just simply says, from our location, we will go out on these journeys and we will come back from this journey. And it's, sometimes it's a 1 day, a 3 day journey. We're out and we're back, out and we're back. The nomadic model is we go out and we stay out. Both models are good and effective. Wilderness is not inherently good or bad. It can be very helpful. It can be very problematic. Again, it all depends on what? Pick a good therapist over a good program. You want to find the best of the best of the best and put your kid there, and they will have a phenomenal experience. But it's not just the therapist. It's going to be the staff. It's going to be the wilderness guides. It's going to be the line staff, or whatever they call them in that particular program, your support staff. It's going to be your administrators. Your staff make all the difference in the world of whether it's going to be a success or not. That's why programs go through these 3 to 5 years. You can rebuild a program. It's about putting the right people in the right places. Okay. So that's wilderness overview. Some of the wilderness programs are starting to do academic stuff more and more and more, and that's a good idea. It's smart to do that. It's not a good idea to stay in wilderness indefinitely. If a kid's in wilderness 120 days, I'm asking questions as to like, why is this happening? Because if they're reaching that level of say like incompatibility with the outdoor arena, then and the therapeutic process, then that may be one of those kids who's probably you're gonna start looking at that behavioral modification type program. It's very unusual. I mean, I don't prefer to see somebody out there for more than 60 days, 70 days. That to me is a lot still. You give me a kid out in the wilderness for 3 or 4 weeks, and there's going to be a ton of therapeutic movement, like a ton. And depending on where they start, that may be enough to transition them back. It may be enough to say, okay, now we can do this transitional work and move you to a residential program, kind of a thing. Other methods that I want to highlight: bans. Bans are dumb in general. Bans, like in the therapeutic world, keeping a kid from other kids, generally speaking, is the dysfunctional process. I know there are more extreme situations where they've been used and they've been useful, but generally speaking, they're dumb. You look, self-control is part of the growth process. So unless there's a safety reason to do the ban, there shouldn't be a ban. And by safety reason, oftentimes when a kid is doing really intense identity work, things can get really, really dark in their mind. And so a little more controlled friendship movement is important. It shouldn't be a total ban. It should just be more controlled. Think about it like mediating a couple that's having a hard time or something like that. If it's one piece of the couple, it doesn't matter. You still mediate, but a lot of programs, it's simpler to go to bans for the staff. And they use that because it's simple for them. That method, generally speaking, is a problem. Generally, there are very rare exceptions to the whole bans concept being a terrible process. The reconciliation process, what they call seats or timeouts or a break or silence or reflection. The reconciliation process should be very flippin' clear. It should be clear to the individual, it should be clear to the family, and it should be clear to the community. There should be zero secrets about what's going on in the reconciliation process. And again, notice my framing of it, learned from experience. It is not a punishment. It is not a consequence. It is a way of correcting things that have been going wrong, whether that's identity work, which it usually comes back to, or it's a situation where there was behaviors of acting out in a way that's unhealthy for the community and unhealthy for the individuals. It's not about punishment. It's about reconciliation, getting things back on track, which means it should be as quickly as possible. I have come across some one kid in particular, man, he just never leaves my mind. And not because he was a bad kid. I loved this kid. He was such a neat kid, so flippin' smart, but also so very lazy. So lazy. And he discovered that he could be more patient and more lazy than the process. And it became really intriguing because he just didn't want to. He just didn't want to. He didn't, he wasn't belligerent about it. He wasn't, completely disrespectful about it. He's just like, you know what? If the answer is I've got to sit here until I do this, I will just sit here. That was his answer. It was quite comical. And this kid was, at his graduation, he asked me to talk about him. And I just adored this kid and his family. And, those things though aren't about punishment. They're about growth. And he did the growth. He didn't want to, he resisted it, but he did it. And we never had to escalate. It never became, I hate you, you hate me. It never really did become that. And so it was effective. It was not punishment. He didn't view it as punishment. I didn't view it as punishment. And I want to be really clear moving into this next one. Another intervention is transportation services. I, whenever possible, am a hard, stinking no. I appreciate that some people will not go without transportation services. I get all that stuff. And I get, more importantly, that some families are inadequately equipped to do the job themselves. I do. I get that. And if at all possible, and I learned this later on in my time. I learned this early in my time, and I would teach it to everybody and anybody who would listen to me. And early on, not a lot of people listened to me because I was just a therapist. I was a nobody. And later on, they did listen to me more and more and more. But transportation services is a last resort. When you hear in those teen programs that kids were kidnapped from their room in the middle of the night, it's transportation services. It's not the program. The program may have told the family about it, but the family decided they were not equipped to do it. And 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was actually being encouraged to use transportation services. I don't like it. Don't like it at all. It's terrifying. I mean, we're creating a trauma. Now, if you want to use transportation services, please, please hear this clearly. Tell your kid that you're going to use transportation services if they can't get their crap together and go with you. Tell them, well, they'll run away. Okay. So they run away. They get themselves picked up by the police. In other words, you're not creating the trauma. And then from there, they get handed off to transportation services to be transported to a that method, way better, like 100% better than having them kidnapped out of their room. Because that's what it feels like to them. I have heard the stories. I did not have the experience, but I have had the experience of hearing enough of those stories. I am telling you straight up, do not do that if you can help it. Which means it has to be the very last resort. And they should know it's coming. They should know it's coming. They shouldn't know what night it's coming because that would be dangerous, right? They would leave and, it could be, get themselves in. But even still, I would rather have them get picked up by police or they should know it's coming. It should not be a surprise to them that somebody is standing there picking them up, cuffing them in some cases because they're acting. It shouldn't be a surprise. I cannot condone or advocate that kind of behavior in adults. So keep that in mind. Do what you want with it. All right. So I started this, and I know this is much more long-winded today than some of my last ones. I started this with the question. The question I posed was, is residential programming for teens helpful or harmful? And I said, it depends. And then I told you the top priority is pick a person, a therapist, good staff over a program with the greatest reputation in the world, unless it's because they have the best staff and the best therapists and stuff like that. Because I wanted to remind you of that before I address healing and harm. In wilderness, healing is about getting out of the noise. It's an environmental shift for almost all of the kids who go to a wilderness program, which forces them, brand new environment, forces them to check into what's most important, right? What it takes to survive in the inner city versus what it takes to survive on the farm are very, very different things. What it takes to survive in wilderness is different than what it takes to survive in a school. And because of that, they can reassess who they are. So it should be identity driven. Transportation, I already went over. Harmful, unless it's from the police to the transportation services and on, because then they created it themselves. Unless it's you warned them, it's coming, you're going to do it. They run away for a couple of weeks, they return, and then you do it because they created it themselves. Is reconciliation healing or harmful? It's healing when it's designed for growth. It's harmful when it's designed for control. When the adults are doing it to control the situation. It's not about control. It's about growth. So the lazy response for adults in programs, I've seen it thousands of times. I've corrected it thousands of times. Every time I saw it, I corrected it, which is part of the reason part one of this series, I talked about like people stopped bringing information to me. Unfortunately, I'm talking adults stopped bringing information to me because they knew I would correct them and be like, how is that going to, I would literally ask the question, how is that going to grow this kid or this family? And if they're like, well, we need it in order to, to manage the environment. I'm like, fine, I hear you, but how is it going to grow them? Because if it's not going to grow them, it's the wrong approach, period. So when reconciliation is about growth, it is healing and good and healthy. When it is about punishment, when it is about control, it is harmful. So you have to teach the staff. You have to be, and the same is true. Matter of fact, with parents, they need to be taught this too. One of the things I taught families along my journey as I matured into it, I realized families did not know how to grow children, which is part of the reason they were there. I would say a good, 3/4 of the time, the kid was there because they had a dysfunctional process that was a habit oftentimes, or some type of addictive process, social media or whatever, drugs, whatever, that was learned because their family was dysfunctional. And so I had to teach families how to grow children, how to grow their family, because they didn't know. I mean, there's not a manual for parents. And so I had to help them learn that along the way. And then bans, healing or harmful, 99.99999% of the time, much like transportation, it is not going to be helpful. Therefore, it's either neutral or harmful. So there you go. Other risks, student that you should be aware of is the student on student harm was much greater than I knew when I was early in my years. I did not understand how kids were harming each other. It was, I hate saying this out loud because it tells you how naive I was in the beginning. And it's a fact. I was naive in the beginning. Students harm students in these programs. And we have to take special precautions to make sure that that doesn't happen. Student mentorship programs is one way to do that. Mentorship programs from a student to an outside adult in their home arena, whether that be like an aunt or an uncle or a family friend, is another way. And staff managing the relationships that become unhealthy is another way. Student to staff sometimes is harmful. Students will target staff. I watched it happen. And staff sometimes will target students. I've seen that happen. Those are harmful scenarios. However, if you flip it, students can benefit and grow staff. I have so many phenomenal students in my background that I got to learn a lot of this stuff. I got to grow because they helped me learn. They didn't know they were my teachers. I told them when they taught me stuff, but they didn't know how much learning I was doing because of them. Now, some would argue they were not there to teach me. I know. It was a byproduct of being in a healthy relationship. You don't get into a relationship saying, I'm going to be the learner and you're going to be the teacher. As a therapist, we get into it. I'm going to be the healer and you're going to be the healed. Yes, that's true. But at the end of the day, if we truly develop a relationship, which is why I talked about the behavioral modification model and the relational model, if we truly get into a relationship, at the end of the day, we're going to grow each other. It's not going to be one-sided. Is one going to grow more than the other? Yeah, probably at times. But at times, no, it's going to go both ways. It's going to flip-flop even. And kids who I had later in their programs that were well-adjusted and developing kids, oh my gosh, They grew me so much. When I watched them lead and mentor other kids and stop terrible, student to student harm, man, like it was a beautiful thing. And something that doesn't really ever get talked about. I'm just pulling back the curtain, folks. Do what you want with this. Staff to staff can be growing, can be harmful. I was kept in the dark. I learned that after the fact, and I was super hurt at the end of one of these programs. I was super hurt by how much I had been kept in the dark from the staff. It was so sad to me, so incredibly sad to me that they were so afraid of growing that they kept secrets from me. Because as invested as I was in the students, I was equally as invested in the staff and the families. And that sucks, honestly. In that particular way, I understand why some of these former students of these teen programs are so hurt and mad at the staff. Because I experienced some of that myself. To the extent that they did, probably not. But I saw it. But the flip side of that was I got to learn that the staff can be very healing for the staff too. It's all about growth and how you show up. Do you love them and care about them enough to show up for them so that they can do their growing? So that when it's time to reconcile, you're not doing it out of punishment. You're doing it for growth. So that's an important aspect that often gets overlooked. I told you I was going to give you some meat today, folks. I hope you're chewing on this, and I hope this makes sense. Students to student harm and healing does happen. Students healed students, students harmed students. Students healed staff, students harmed staff. Staff healed students, staff harmed students. I saw some of it. And every time I called it out, they would put me more and more in the dark. The staff would. And in that way, I saw that staff to student harm that was going on. I didn't know to the extent early on, but once I learned about it, I never unlearned that. I never unlearned it. I learned to identify it. I learned how to work with it. Am I the master of doing it? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But every time I saw it, I called it out. All right. The initial question: is residential programming for teens helpful or harmful? I hope I painted for you how it can be helpful and how it can be harmful. The answer is it depends, because it's person driven. Who is in charge? How the transitions take place? Who is the clinician? Who are the staff? How the transitions home take place? If a program is going to be successful, it has to be relationally driven. I am convinced 100% that that is the way it has to work, with the only exception being lockdown facilities that are behavioral mod, and it's because those people have a greater level of dysfunction than the vast majority of the people I ever saw. Some, I ran across some crises for sure, but most didn't require that. People driven, love based, care based, growth based, because it's people driven. I hope this helps. Please like, subscribe, give us feedback, give us your comments. If you are, while I'm there, I'm going to digress for a second. If you are former students, former parents, please know I cannot keep anything on this social world confidential for you. I'm telling you that because if you put it out there, it's public information. That is not me breaking confidentiality. You have the right to decide to do that if you want. I will remind myself to add a disclaimer. I'm going to write that down. Because that disclaimer should be there for this particular one since I'm addressing something like this. Is it required by any means? No, because I've told all of my clients over the years that statement, they've all signed these things. But out of courtesy, I'll probably put the disclaimer in there again. I hope this helps. Thank you for joining us. I know this one was long, but I hope it was really helpful. And remember to join us for the 4th episode. In the 4th episode, I am going to go over what should residential look like. What should it look like? You might have some idea, but I'm going to detail it out for you. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. We appreciate our audience a lot, so we give you some simple ways to track us down. Please like, subscribe, and follow all the podcasts on different platforms, but you can also email us at healthyperspectives@protonmail.com, or you can check out our website at healthy-perspectives.com/podcast. It's a backward slash. So if you want to go to our landing page, if you go to healthy-perspectives.com, you'll still find us. You just got to click on the podcast button. Thank you so much.